Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Tuesday, May 17th, 2013, and this is episode number 69.
In this episode, we're going to discuss Facebook ad performance, content curation with Flipboard's user-generated magazine feature, a review of Focus Twist for iOS, Daft Punk streaming their album for free on iTunes to combat piracy, Google launching a content recommendation engine for mobile, and much more. Well, those are the most words we've had in the intro in a while, I think.
Yeah, quite the intro there. A lot of good stuff. Kind of hopping around this week. No central theme emerged, so we're just going to hit on some interesting news stories and some tool reviews and some stats and all sorts of fun stuff. So it should be a good one. But as always, we are starting with our infographic / stat of the week, and this week we've got some interesting statistics related to Facebook's ad exchange. And this is, not the DIY Facebook ad platform that most of us are familiar with. This is the Facebook exchange that they've launched where it functions more like a traditional ad exchange. They put their ad inventory up for auction, and then various networks can bid on that. And so what they've done is they've started to open up some of their data to third-party services. And so one of those third-party services did a study and looked at the effectiveness of ads placed in the news feed versus ads placed in the sidebar. And this was done using Facebook Exchange ads. So the difference between this and a normal Facebook ad is that it's using data from web browsing cookies rather than Facebook data. So it's not targeting based on, you like Oreo, so here's a cookie advertisement. It's saying, you went to Oreo.com, so here's a cookie advertisement. Subtle little difference there. But the big difference is just looking at the newsfeed compared to the sidebar. And when they looked at the ads in the newsfeed, they actually found there was a 17.1 times higher click-through ratio and a 51%.
Let's say that again, 17.1 times. That's a multiplying. That's not percent. That's times, right?
I believe so. 17 times multiplier on the click-through ratio, and a 51% lower cost per click versus the sidebar.
A lower cost per click as well, huh?
Lower cost per click, resulting in a 200% improvement in ROI for newsfeed versus sidebar. This is pretty far removed from what most people are going to have to deal with, but I think the general interesting nuggets to take out of this is that the newsfeed really does perform a lot better than the sidebar. And so, when you're creating content, that's the reason why the goal is to get that content seen by people inside of the newsfeed, because, just buying your way onto the sidebar, yes, you're getting eyeballs and people are seeing it technically, but they're really not seeing it. They're not engaging with it. They're 17 times less likely to click on it. You're spending more to get that click. So I think it just supports the idea that content inside of Facebook is much stronger than the advertising. And so, spend your efforts on building up great content instead of trying to master, targeting and narrowing down this audience until you can get them to click on your sidebar ad.
I was saying, what that's reminiscent of? It's reminiscent of the whole organic versus paid and search results. After a while, enough people have grown accustomed to not paying attention to the paid ads. So the organic stuff, regardless of whether somebody's paying for it or not, the organic stuff, due to its placement and everything, becomes the ratio is 75% usually. Folks are paying more attention to the organic ads than they are to the sponsored ads across the top and across the right hand side, and that's been sort of the metric to go by for years and years and years with Google.
Yeah, very true. So, I don't think any big surprises here, but again, it's just reiterating the fact that content is key and, make sure you're really nailing that content because it can be much more effective than a simple advertisement. Even if it's similar types of content, similar types of messaging, just presenting that in a new area in this newsfeed is going to be a lot stronger than in the sidebar. And speaking of content, our main topic for today is content curation through, a couple of different tools, but one of the ones that I wanted to focus on is Flipboard's new magazine feature, or I guess Flipboard's recently opened magazine feature. It's been something that's been available previously, but with version 2.0 of Flipboard, they opened it up to any user to create a DIY magazine using the Flipboard platform. And so far, response seems to be pretty good. They announced it, I think, I want to say about 2 months ago. When they announced it, they said, hey, we've got 50 million users, and now we're announcing Flipboard 2.0. And then they've been trying to kind of keep up with this PR wave because they're announcing user growth and the number of magazines and really trying to show that, hey, Flipboard is a growing channel, a growing platform. So since announcing it with 50 million users, they've actually added 6 million new users in just a couple of months. So a lot of new people kind of picking up the Flipboard platform, checking it out. And between those 56 million users, over 1 million user-generated magazines have been created. So, taking a step back, what this is offering is Flipboard was kind of the first content curation application for the iPad specifically. You tell it, I'm interested in sports and business and technology, and it would kind of churn for a little bit and say, okay, well, we went out and we found all of these articles for you that fit into the categories that you were interested in. But it was sort of an anonymous,
rather than sort of consider like what I guess I would kind of consider true content curation, which is you yourself are sort of curating things from around the web and pulling them together. It was really sort of doing algorithmically. And I think it's curation in the sense that, there's other things out there like Pocket and all that came after Flipboard, but those were like, you'd go out on the web, you'd find content, you'd save it, and you'd curate your own sort of, stories from around the web. In this case, it was doing it either algorithmically based on the topics that you were interested in, or based on, for instance, social channels that were created. So you could follow all your friends on Facebook and then just see everything that they were sort of sharing in regards to content. So videos and articles and things like that. Or even say Twitter lists. So if you were to follow a Twitter list, like I followed Robert Scoble, a lot of Robert Scoble stuff, where he'll have Twitter lists based on, technology executives or something. And suddenly you're essentially following a list that he curated that was feeding in all of this content coming from Twitter from these executives that he had on that list. So what we're talking now is them sort of stepping it up in regards to how each individual channel is made, right? Or the subscription-based sort of magazines, as they're calling them, are made.
Yeah, exactly. So it's great that you mentioned Pocket because that's a great analogy to this. So Pocket, Read It Later, Pocket and Instapaper. We've talked about those in the past. It's a way of just saving things to kind of read later.
Yeah.
And so basically you can think of Flipboard 2.0 as opening up your Pocket or, Read It Later list to the world and saying, okay, I'm going to add all these things and you can kind of read along with me. And so, Robert Scoble, he actually has created a Flipboard magazine for Google Glass. He calls it the Glassholes magazine, playing on the name affectionately given to early adopters of Google Glass. So he's got a Glassholes Flipboard magazine, and basically he can go out and find all of this content, and as people are reviewing Google Glass or as they're posting pictures, and he can pull it all into a magazine. And then if you're interested in Google Glass, rather than saying, okay, Flipboard, kind of keep an eye on Twitter, and when a link that mentions Google Glass gets shared a lot, pull that in, you're saying, okay, Robert Scoble, I'm trusting you to find the best content for Google Glass, and I'm going to read your magazine. And so it's, it's a pretty simple concept. It's not groundbreaking. This isn't some new thing that they just invented. They basically said, okay, we've got kind of similar technologies out there, but we have this platform with 50 plus million users. And so if you create a magazine, there's a potentially large audience out there to actually read this. And going back to the idea that this isn't really a new technology, it's actually something that they offered to brands in the past. So if you called up Flipboard and you're like, hey, I really, I like what you've got going on with your application, and we're trying to reach the iPad audience, what can we do to work together? And they would say, oh, well, for between 5 and 6 figures, we'll set you up with a nice little media buy. And as an added bonus, you can also create your own magazine. And so what they've essentially done is taken that process and made it free for anyone to use. So what used to cost you 5 to 6 figures is now free, but you've got to do your own promotion, which, helps Flipboard in the end because you're now going out and bringing new users into the Flipboard platform and the Flipboard experience. So it's a really interesting way for brands to get involved in content curation because, like I said, you're tapping into this existing audience that Flipboard has already built up, and you're using tools that they've already created. So you're not having to, build an iPad application from scratch and then go out and promote it and figure out how to tell people how to install it. You're basically saying, look, if you've already got Flipboard, subscribe to our channel, and we'll try to keep up with, the best in a certain vertical and give you that information. And it's sort of an exchange of value. The brand is going out and saying, well, we're going to spend our time to find the best articles. And in exchange, you'll see our logo and you'll see our name a couple times a day as you're browsing through our magazine. So I think it's a really interesting, at least an opportunity for a lot of different brands to explore. What about you, Adam? With that pitch in mind, do you think this is something you might be interested in checking out?
Yeah, I mean, I've honestly not, dove in. I think, like you were saying earlier, this is something that was very inside baseball for brands who wanted to get some help from this directly from Flipboard's team. It's kind of like reminiscent to what happens in many cases when anybody's trying to create sort of a brand presence on these networks. Even Foursquare, for instance, before they had their self-serve platform for brands, they were, people were talking about how hard it was to sort of, I think you even talked about that in the past, Corey, where just you were like continually having to knock on the door and say, look, I've got clients that need to establish this or do that. And you had to wait in line because they were doing everything sort of a la carte in a way. I don't know if that's the right term for this particular thing. They were doing it on demand for each client instead of sort of having a system, an easy system to make it happen. And so that it just seems like Flipboard's now sort of made this a self-serve option, obviously. And like you said, I mean, Flipboard is the one that works, that wins a lot in this case, because if people are doing this, you're essentially, you have to have the app in order to make that work. But I've not really looked at how it would benefit a brand versus an independent, say, content curator such as you or I or Robert Scoble, or somebody like that. Have you looked into, are there sort of Flipboards that are made? And I know that there are some that are, for instance, say Forbes or Wired magazine or something like that, but they usually stick with their content only. And I guess that's perfectly fine, obviously, right? Any sort of media company could do that. Do you see anybody sort of uniquely and creatively using it beyond maybe some of those really large publishers who already have sort of had their foot in the door?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is, I mean, the end goal for a lot of companies would be to create so much amazing content on your own that, you could put that in front of people and they'd be like, wow, I've got, all I need. I understand everything I want to know about the vertical that you live in, sort of your own world. You're creating a ton of great content. But for a lot of brands, that's either going to be cost prohibitive or, you're just not set up that way. You'd have to bring on this huge team to run that. The example of that is like Red Bull. They put out a legitimate magazine. They actually print the thing and mail it to people's homes. It is a full-on magazine.
The Red Bulletin, right?
The Red Bulletin, exactly. And you have to pay to subscribe to this thing. It's not like a gussied up catalog or something like that. It's literally a magazine. So that's like, that's like 11 on the scale of difficulty. And what Flipboard is doing is they're creating like the 2 on the scale of difficulty. So yes, you've got to actually go out there and find articles, but you don't have to write them yourself. You don't have to figure out how to code them into some sort of, hands-on CMS platform. It's as simple as adding something to Pinterest or, saving it into Pocket. You basically click this little bookmarklet and it says, okay, well, it's now added to your magazine. Which magazine do you want to go in? And do you have any comment to add on top? And you say, here of my 3, I want it to go in here. And, I'm going to type a little comment. It says, hey, great article. I thought they made great points A, B, and C. And that's all it takes. And suddenly you've added content to your magazine. And then, if you want to step it up, sure, you could link to more and more of your own content as you're producing that. And maybe eventually you get to a point where your Flipboard magazine is all of your own content just sort of living within Flipboard. But I think what's nice is it's scalable. So again, you could go from, I don't write any of my own content, but I'm good at kind of going out there and finding it. Maybe I'm an ice cream shop and I I find all these interesting recipes and all these interesting mixtures and flavors and all this sort of information, and I can group that together and kind of share that knowledge. You've got that on one end all the way up to, the Red Bull of like, well, I'm making videos and I'm sharing awesome photos, and now I can bring that all together and create a Red Bull Flipboard magazine that people could subscribe to, and it's just going to promote my own brand. So I think
and they give you stats and all this, right? I mean, you have some metrics behind it. So, I could look at somebody like, just imagine, of course, this is obviously a large brand, but somebody like Adobe. Adobe has a bunch of independent blogs for each product. They have a blog related to sort of, if it's Photoshop, it could be anything from photography to design. And there's, I'm sure, so they have a bunch of very niche content blogs, but they also allow some of their professionals, some of their pros out there to have individual blogs as well. And so it may be a thing where somebody like them would tie it all together into a magazine and even potentially create multiple Flipboard magazines so that they could target specific audiences and say, look, we're going to put all the content here, no matter who it's from. Like you said, it's not like you're not necessarily throwing a RSS feed in there. I don't know if they have that feature at all.
No, they don't.
Okay, which makes it in a way better, right? You can curate things on sort of a one-off basis, and you might have to put a staff member on it, part-time for a part of the week and say, look, we need you to spend an hour or two a day curating these individual digital publications that we have on Flipboard. But it's very interesting also when we talked about Pocket and how Pocket was doing this stuff with their publishing tools, right? And with their publishing tools, they were essentially saying, look, we're allowing you to get some more insight into what people are sharing with Pocket. Well, there has to be enough traction with the Pocket users, the Pocket community, for that to matter to you at all. And for larger publications, you by just starting it off and trying it out and then checking out your metrics, you quickly see, is this worth using this as another point of sort of reference and measure of success of our content, because it's different than somebody viewing your content online. It's being pulled into a platform now that if they don't allow you to have the metrics, it's not going to have Google Analytics behind it, for instance. And then you've got the whole Pulse thing with LinkedIn, right? Where now, where it just, the more that we've talked about it over the last few weeks, especially, Corey, I start to think about, this year has been the year of content marketing, even though it's been going on for quite some time. And it's very interesting to see these content channels start to go from simply be consumption platforms to now actually be more friendly towards curators and content producers and publishers in a way that helps them almost now in a way treat that as an independent channel that they need to pay attention to. It's not that they're just paying attention to what just randomly gets fed. They actually need to be proactive in feeding. They can be proactive in feeding those channels, at least in Flipboard's case, right? In Pulse's case and in Pocket's case, you're measuring the activity as it's being done by users. In Flipboard's case, they're allowing you to measure the activity based on your proactiveness and sort of curating this content and channeling it into your own magazines, right?
Yeah, and I do think the one thing that's missing from Flipboard and missing from a lot of these is that in-depth analytics. So Flipboard will tell you for your own magazine how many people have subscribed and how many flips, which is sort of like a page view, but you're viewing multiple pieces of content at once. So it's not quite as good as a page view. But that's it, really. It's not really giving you anything deeper than that. So you can't, create a magazine and say, okay, well, I published 20 articles and here's a prioritized list of which one got the most clicks and shares and, maybe optimize against that. It's very top level. But at the same time, this is a very early platform. So, when it was first introduced, the only way to add content was inside of the application itself. And since then, they've actually added a web tool that you can use to organize your content and, prioritize things, move things around. So it seems like something that, maybe they were testing, they had a minimum viable product, they said, let's put it out there. If people use it, great, we'll continue to develop it. And I think signs are pointing to people using it. With 1 million user-generated magazines out there, that's a lot of demand for better tools, more information, that sort of thing. So hopefully they continue to build this thing out and really make it something that brands would get a lot of value out of, because I think it's interesting. Like you said, it's sort of the year of content, and hey, if you can't figure out how to create it yourself, at least you can go out there and say, all right, well, I'm great at gathering together the best of content in a specific industry and provide value that way. And, like I said, maybe it becomes a stepping stone to creating content on your own. So interesting tool and definitely something worth checking out. I think for a lot of brands, there's it's not something where it's a specific vertical. It's not like if you're a tech company, you're the only one that can take advantage of this. I think there's all sorts of different types of businesses that could, at least experiment with a Flipboard magazine, see what it takes, see what the process is like. And, hey, maybe a month down the road, you see you've got a fair number of subscribers and it's worth keeping up with.
Yeah, I mean, if you're sort of, an independent content curator, again, like I would sort of consider Robert Scoble, even though Robert does it on behalf of obviously not only himself, but he works for Rackspace Hosting. So, he does it a lot with that in mind. But you're an independent content curator. There's certain benefits from that. But if you are a company that doesn't produce any content, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what would be the benefit to a company, a brand, right, who doesn't actually produce their own content to get into this. I don't see one necessarily. Other than potentially, if you do produce a little bit of content, maybe it's about creating sort of almost like you would do on Twitter. You curate content, you don't produce enough. So what do? You sort of find great content that your community would be interested in, and you share that content, but you also sort of pepper in your content with it as well. But I would say, subscribe yourself to some other ones, maybe folks that are similar to your brand, or folks that you, sort of admire or like, and want to pay attention to, and see what kind of content are they sharing and what's the frequency, where is it coming from? And then do the, experimenting with your own content if you have it, or consider upping the ante on your content, because really the only way to see whether it be successful or not is to do it and then to measure it, in my mind. What do you think, Corey?
Ain't nothing to it but to do it. I like that. I mean, it's, you're right. It's sort of something to test out. And I think it's also a good way to sort of refine the process of finding and approving and curating content. So if you're a smaller company, that process is probably you yourself sitting there and being like, do I want to put this out there? Yes, I do. Okay, it's live. But if you're a bigger company, if you're an enterprise, there's probably, various groups that need to weigh in, whether it's legal, some sort of compliance group, or whether it's, making sure it works its way up the food chain so that people, the sort of higher ups that want to nod along and say, yes, I approve that, they get to see it. But it's a sort of lighter weight way of putting that process in place versus something like, okay, we're going to launch a blog. Well, there's a whole lot that goes into actually putting your own opinions out there, versus just saying, well, this is somebody else's opinion and we're curating it, but this isn't necessarily ours. We're just linking to it. So yeah, it's a good way of testing some of those processes as well.
I'm going to be interested in checking it out. I think thinking about a few clients. I have a number of clients, for instance, that work in the social justice area. And I know they work a lot with sort of coalitions and alliances and things like that. And if there's a readership there, right, that's the hard part without the right tools, is to understand what sort of readership is using or available on these platforms, and being able to say, okay, look, we see that people are there that are interested in this. Let's go ahead and take this alliance of folks and let's create a channel based on all the content that we produce individually on our own platforms or blogs or whatever, the case may be. In most cases, with some web searches and some other tools around the web, we can see where certain types of communities congregate. And therefore we know, sort of like with an educated guess, if, Reddit or Pinterest or this particular niche community or Facebook or whatever is the best place to reach out to. But when it comes to this, at least again, from my limited exposure to exactly what the tool has going on, and I'm going to go take a deep dive after the show. Maybe not today, but after the show sometime, I'm going to take a deep dive because I'd really like to know if there's a way to get a clear estimation of whether or not that audience, if there's any way to find out if that audience is out there. Because, you were talking about the number 56 million users. I mean, 56 million users is super, super significant in my mind for something like this. I think something like even, 20 million users would be something to pay attention to. This is double that.
Yeah, it's Android and iOS, which is nice. So you're not just limiting yourself to iOS. They started out in iOS, but they've branched out, and now it's available in both their Android and their iOS platforms. So, I think that's good. A lot of times it's like, well, I'm only getting Apple people, and that's a specific type of person. It's not the case here. You're basically able to hit, both sides of the major smartphone market.
And they're talking about launching a web version too, weren't they? Whether they did or not, I don't remember.
Maybe. I haven't seen much in the way of web from them. Even, sort of Flipboard, the regular version of their application for the web. But it certainly seems like the type of thing that you could eventually port into a web iteration. And
like a Chrome app or something like that, I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's the case, then all these brands that are experimenting early on and getting their magazines in place now, as soon as they flip that switch, well, suddenly you've got a whole new audience and you're not playing catch up. So worth checking out, I think, worth playing around with. And I'm a big proponent of content curation, and if it's made easier by a tool like this, I think then by all means go to it and let some of the work be done by somebody else. I think that's a nice way of looking at it. All right, so with that, let's dive into a quick tool review of another iOS application, actually, that I got a chance to play around with and kind of found it, and the elevator pitch is pretty simple. It's an app called Focus Twist, all one word, Focus Twist. You can find it at focustwist.com. And it's basically a $2 Lytro camera. So if you're familiar with Lytro it's a whole new class of camera. It doesn't take photos the way that a normal camera does. It has this light field technology. It's really crazy. I honestly don't even understand it, so I couldn't begin to explain it. But
you got to check out. There was a TED Talk. TEDx San Jose, the then CEO and founder of it, talked about it, and he really went in depth. It wouldn't be possible without having a digital camera, without photography being digital. Back in the day, you had to sort of focus the camera and decide where it was going to be focused on, and that would be what you were to capture. With the light field technology, it has essentially, because it has a computer inside, it's able to actually take the light and off of everything, focused, unfocused, all that, and sort of capture everything all at once. So that instead of having to deal with deciding what you're going to focus and getting this sort of locked in image, it captures everything that's in front of it all together at once and then says, hey, now go ahead and manipulate it. So you could take a photo that has, a grasshopper on a leaf of a flower right in front of you with, a house behind it, and you could actually focus on the grasshopper if you want. And this is stuff, obviously, it's only available on the device or on screen. You can't do it on a piece of paper once you print it out or anything. But you could click on something in the background, the foreground, the middle ground live after you've shot the photo, and it will change the focus. And they've also made it so you could sort of click on an image and sort of drag it around. So it almost gives you a very slight 3D way where you could look side to side around objects and images just a little bit after you've shot them. So it's actually revolutionary, and the Lytro camera itself is the first camera that's taken advantage of this technology, which could be ported into any digital camera or camera phone or anything like that in the future. So Focus Twist, as you're talking about, and I'll let you get back to, is sort of, in my opinion, a complete hack wannabe version of it the way that they do it. But it's still an interesting sort of way to get around having to buy a Lytro camera, I guess, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And, no qualms about it. Focus Twist took Lytro and they were like, well, we can kind of fake that. And it's not the exact same. So Lytro has an infinite range of focus, and it's capturing things. You could do 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters. It's going to readjust every time you click. Basically what Focus Twist is doing is they're picking a number of predetermined focus points. So they're going to pick something that's a foot away, 10 feet away, and then 100 feet away, and then layer those 3 images on top of each other. And then whatever's in that field of focus, you can click on, and it'll sort of readjust the focus. It's definitely not as smooth as Lytro. It's taking photos in succession. So one trick is it has to be a super stable image. You can't do like a motion shot. You can't really do handheld. The best way to do this thing is to lock it off on a tripod or have your phone kind of balanced on a table or something. It's not something where you're just walking around like snapping away these focus twists, especially to get the best quality. They're working on server-side software that'll actually adjust for if you're kind of moving the camera around doing handheld. And when I had tested it out, I guess they were having a bit of a server backlog, so they hadn't been able to apply some of that technology to the photo. So, they're trying to solve for some of that, but again, it's not a perfect replica for Lytro, but Lytro costs hundreds of dollars, and Focus Twist costs $2. So
Lytro is $400 to $500 for the camera. Exactly.
Yeah, and Focus Twist, I guess you could argue that it's $600 for the iPhone and then $2 on top of that. But if you've already got the iPhone, I think it's fun to play around with. It's not something you're gonna, I've dumped Instagram, I'm only taking focus twist photos from now on. But it's a cool way of, maybe doing some fun product shots or just varying up your Twitter tweets for a couple of days. Instead of the normal photo, you can say, oh, check out these fun, interactive photos that we took with Photo Twist.
But they have to be embedded, right? I mean, they have to be embedded with some sort of, is it the player that Focus Twist provides or something like that?
Yeah, very similar to Lytro. Same thing. When you share it, in order to get that interactivity, it has to live inside of a Focus Twist kind of application. So, it's not like it pops up in a Twitter card and you can play around with it. You've got to actually go to the Focus Twist website. And that's one of the limitations. It doesn't have, you can't go to like focustwist.com/Corey O'Brien and see all of my photos. It doesn't have an online profile page. So it's kind of similar to the early days of Instagram, where each photo you can share it and then it gets a URL, but there's no central hub for all of your photos. So, it's an early app, it's a test app, but I think it's fun. I'd say it's worth the $2 if you like playing around with new gadgets, and, just sort of rethinking the way that you're doing mobile photography. And from that point of view, I think it's cool. My hope is that, a year, 2 years down the road, similar technology to what's in an actual Lytro is in mobile phones, and we no longer have to have this sort of fake version. We can have the real version. But until then, it's nice to know that there is an option out there that, for being an early application, I'd say it works pretty well. So might as well check it out, see what you think of it. If you try it once and don't like it, maybe you just wasted $2, but it's not like you've thrown hundreds of dollars out the window. So
what's your recommendation for marketers?
My recommendation, I would say, product shots are great. If you're the type of company that's taking photos of the products that you sell and then posting those on Twitter, then, try it out. Be like, I'm going to take one of these photos with Focus Twist. I'm going to set it up in an interesting way that takes advantage of that multiple levels of focus. I'm going to post it up on Twitter and see what the audience reacts to. If they like it, great. If they don't, then I'll lesson learned and I'll not do that in the future. But I think product shots are great. That's really it. I mean, if you're just out there taking like landscape photography all day, every day, then it's not going to be enhanced by Focus Twist in any way.
I mean, even a Lytro camera is not going to do much to enhance, those sort of images.
Exactly, yeah. So I think if it's something where you're putting it on a table, you're taking a picture of it, then put it on a table, put something cool behind it, take a picture with Focus Twist, and let people play around with it. And just see if that little bit of interactivity increases the engagement with the photos that you're sharing. So again, not a replacement for your day-to-day camera, but a fun toy to play around with, and maybe something that if you're an early adopter, it'll kind of surprise people a little bit and make them want to interact with it in a way that they wouldn't on just a plain photo.
Exactly.
All right, Adam, you know what time it is.
I'm afraid to hear. What is it?
The lightning round. Ba, 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 ba. All right. Well, we've got a couple of stories ready to go and 60 seconds on the clock. So I'm going to dive right into the first one. Ready and go. So Daft Punk, for those of you that listened to last episode, we talked quite a bit about their new album release. They're doing some interesting things, and the streak of interesting things continues because they've decided to stream the entire album for free on iTunes before it's even available to buy. So plenty of musicians, plenty of bands will do like a track and they'll leak it and say, oh, for the rest of the album you got to buy it. Daft Punk was like, screw that, we're gonna let you listen to the entire thing. It's like a radio release, but to the masses. Anybody can log on. It's powered by iTunes, so it's never gonna, it's not like it's gonna go down. It's supported by Apple. You can listen to the entire thing. It's interesting in that it's just one giant track, so you can't like jump between tracks and try to cut it up and turn it into sort of a piracy thing. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to fight piracy in a new way, in an interesting way. And I think it's good. I think we're going to see more bands kind of following in Daft Punk's footsteps with this. All right, Adam, with 60 seconds on the clock, what's your take on Daft Punk's unique album promotion methods? Ready, and go.
So I didn't actually see it advertised in context to piracy, so or sort of countering piracy. It sounds like you did, Corey. For me, I thought it might have been maybe an innovative way for them because they're trying to continually sort of push the digital stuff with a lot of the things we talked about. I think last episode or the episode before. And they're taking advantage of sort of releasing an album for the first time in the age of social media and iTunes and all that stuff. And so they've allowed you to, take a peek at it beforehand. They sort of believe in their product so much ahead of time that they're going to allow it to be streamed on iTunes. I listened to it already 2 or 3 times on there, make a decision quick if I'm going to buy it or not. It's not even out until next month. So I thought it was interesting, and I'd actually like to see artists do this a little bit more often as you get close to the album release. And I think we will see it more often with artists that really believe in what they're producing.
Couple seconds left on the clock there. Real quick, the reason that I said it was mentioned in relation to piracy is the actual album itself, not the single track iTunes version, released or leaked out at pretty much the same time that it was out on iTunes. So I think a lot of people were saying, well, if you're going to download the thing just because you want to hear it, then instead of doing that, they've provided it for free, and they're saying, okay, like, here it is, give it a sneak preview, but don't, steal the whole, like, MP3 thing. Just listen to it, enjoy it, and then when it comes out, hopefully buy the actual legit version. So
yeah, I've listened to it a couple times already, and, I've honestly not gone and downloaded anything illegal for a long, long time. Just note exactly how I said that. I haven't done it for a long, long time. Back in the Napster days, it was a little bit different, I think, for probably all of us. But it's been a long time since I've done that. If it's worth listening to, you either listen to it, for free on Spotify or something like that, or buy the album. So, anyways, I want to ask you more questions about it, but it's the lightning round, so we'll have to save it.
We've got to save it. All right, well, we got one more story in the lightning round, so I've got 60 seconds on the clock, and let's dive right in. Ready, and go. So Google, in their never-ending quest to get people to use Google+, has launched a content recommendation engine for mobile sites that is powered by Google+. So yet again, they're going after publishers. We've seen quite a few things, and I think their hope is, hey, if we can get the publishers on board, they'll help us promote it. It'll get us in front of more users. So basically, there's going to be a number of websites, and when you go to that website on Google+, through a Google search, you'll land there, and the idea is, okay, well, that one story is great, but how do you keep somebody in that site? So Google, with this recommendation engine, is going to use a combination of Google Plus data, information about the story that you just read, what was it about, who wrote it, and then, what they're calling the secret sauce of Google to actually recommend additional content. And they're leveraging Google Plus data if you're logged in, but it's going to work even if you're not. It's going to pull some of that secret sauce. So interesting move, but I'm interested to hear, Adam, what your take on it is. If you think this may...
Secret sauce equal cookies?
Secret sauce equal cookies, yeah, exactly. Do you think this is going to help Google Plus, or do you think that, most publishers are going to read right through this and be like, nah, that's too much access we're giving you? 60 seconds on the clock, ready, and go.
Well, this isn't really unlike something that Facebook is already doing, but I don't see implemented in a lot of ways. They call it their recommendations bar, where you're on certain sites, and once you get down towards the bottom, it'll actually recommend to you other content based on the number of likes that it's received. I don't know whether they measure that based on likes with, against friends that have been on that site, or in general, just sort of likes from folks. So, obviously there's that secret sauce on Facebook's side as well. But at any rate, I think it's pretty cool, because I think one of the things that sites, especially sites that have a lot of content, lack is usually a clear way of sort of continually pushing folks through the stream of content so that they don't just read one post and then close the browser, but actually move around through the content and move on to the next thing. And this is a clear way by both Facebook and Google Plus to sort of customize that experience for each user.
Yeah, it's funny. Until you had pointed out the recommendation bar from Facebook, I forgot that even existed. But it's true. Like, technically it's out there, but I never see it implemented. So I kind of think this is going to be the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's interesting, but again, it's handing over a lot of kind of power of where the person goes within your website to a third party. So that's a lot of trust to put in Google. We'll see if it gets adopted.
There's, other services out there that allow you to like sort of show people related stuff, and it's been happening on some major places, as well as even some of my clients have been using Outbrain. I don't know if you've ever seen Outbrain at all. It's an interesting WordPress plugin that does use data from your site. If you decide to opt in to allow advertisers, what it'll do is at the bottom of each of your posts, it'll show these thumbnails of 3 or 4 or 5 stories that it believes to be related based on sort of churning through your content. And you can install it into a WordPress blog. And I believe currently Mashable, for instance, is one of the major publishers that uses it. And you see it on a lot of the sort of like Us Weekly and People Magazine sort of sites, where not only is it showing content like Mashable does it, where it shows content on the site, but it also says like advertised or sponsored, and will actually pull in content that has been paid to go through the Outbrain network. And those who say that they're willing to provide space for this content to be displayed will actually have that content shown. So Outbrain, in a way, is making money off of helping folks share this content, and they give you metrics to show. So my clients, for instance, don't allow sponsored content, but they're able to get metrics to see what sort of content that Outbrain is helping resurface on a per post basis is helping people stay within that content. So if we have a link for this on the show notes regarding our metric of the week for Facebook ads. And funny enough, Corey, as I was looking at that, they actually have the Facebook recommendation bar at the bottom of that. So if you want to see an example of it, you could go there and actually see what it looks like on the link around the newsfeed versus sidebar ads that we discussed at the beginning of the show. And when you scroll down to the bottom, you'll actually see a little bar that should pop up and show you a recommended story from Facebook, either as you're scrolling down or something like that. But anyways.
All right. Well, good stuff. And as always, we covered a ton of great things this week, and there's plenty more to think about as all of these stories unfold. So if you had a question for us, maybe you want to suggest a topic, maybe give us some feedback, or hey, even if you just want to say hello, we highly encourage that. We'd love to get to know our audience even better than we already do. So if one of the above applies to you and you would like to get in touch with us, the easiest way to do so is likely via Twitter. We are both available at SoLoMoShow, or I can be reached directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
I'm at Secret Sushi, and you can also email us directly at SoLoMoShow@gmail.com. That's SoLoMoShow@gmail.com. And we also have, of course, a Facebook page where we try to share things that we find interesting between shows. So if it doesn't make the show, it doesn't mean it's not good. It just means we might not have time to keep it on theme or insert it into the show. So go check out our Facebook page as well as our Google Plus page. And we have a Pinterest board where we have almost all of our episodes up. I've got some catching up to do. Almost all of our episodes up are YouTube version of the episode. So go there, check those out, and repin those to your heart's delight.
There we go. And all of the links that we just discussed can be found in the show notes, which are available at SoLoMoShow.com, where they should be viewable in your podcast player of choice. So take a look around. You should be able to find show notes. It's where we throw all the links, sometimes supplementary links, a lot of good stuff to check out. So again, you can check those out at SoLoMoShow.com. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, but we hope that you join us next week for another episode of The SoLoMo Show.
Take care.